This might look like a nondescript, modern looking PC, but it's actually one of the workhorses of this channel, as inside beats the heart of a Pentium 1 computer, and I figured after 8 or so years, it deserved a proper home. So why don't you join me as we rehome it in an area appropriate case, while also taking a look at the hardware that I picked for those mid-90s games. So, out with the new and in with the old. And welcome to Goldfish on Games. This is the nuke tower that I want to move it into, even though it's not 100% ideal, as at the end it's not going to be an NEC Direction Pentium 3 system. As of all things, it's actually a Gateway 2000 motherboard that's going to be going inside of it. But I really wanted a beige tower that actually looked interesting and would be correct for the era. And when I spotted this one, I thought it looked quite nice, and it was being sold empty, so I could at least put it to some good use. My ideal tower would be one with a door, or at least something that slides. But I do still like the styling of this one, and if I ever do find the tower of my dreams, then this one will be used for something else. So let's put this to the side while we get everything out of the old case, which is some cheap CIT thing that I bought years ago. And it wasn't the best back then, and it's looking even more worse for wear now. I got this machine as parts, so I needed something to put it into, and I figured I'd find a better tower in time. And that was 7 years ago. And let's start getting the parts out, and first up is the hard drive. Now I'm using an SD to IDE device. That so far has been really fast and I've not had any compatibility issues. Not with the computer, some SD cards don't seem to be too happy with it, but I have made sure it's the only device on that IDE channel. For graphics, I'm using 2 cards. The 2D is provided by the ATI Video Expression, which is based on the Mac64 V2 chip. It has 2MB of RAM fitted, and in my general use it's been really compatible with all the DOS gaming that I've done, and it also supports accelerating Windows nicely. I do also have a S3 Trio 64 V2 DX that I've been tempted to try out, but I'm not going to do that for this video. But let me know in the comments what card you think I should go with in the future. For 3D, it had to be my Orchid Righteous 3D Voodoo 1 card. This is the card that I bought with my Christmas and birthday money back in 1997. It has 4MB of RAM, and being a classic Voodoo, it is compatible with all the early DOS Glide games. Now I made a whole video on this card, so if you're interested in learning more about it, then you should go check that out. After this one, obviously. Now I like to have all my machines on the network, and for this computer I have a Kingston PCI network card. Now this supports up to 100MB connections, but I think the rest of the system is going to be holding that back slightly. But it is fast enough that it is much easier to throw files around the network than trying to write floppy disks, CDs, or attempting to get Windows 95's USB stack to work properly with memory sticks. When it comes to sound, I've gone with the Creative Sound Blaster 32 plug and play. Now I made the mistake of thinking this was actually an OR32, but this is still a great card. And being ISA, it is very compatible with games, and you can actually select the OR32 option in most titles and it will work perfectly. Now this one also has SIM slots for RAM upgrades, so you can load in sound fonts to make it sound a lot better. Now this has 2MB fitted, and if I get my hands on some larger memory sticks, I might have to upgrade this in the future. I might also have to do some fixes to it, as the line-out socket has issues. For power, I'm using this basic modern-ish thing. It has just about enough amps on the 5V rail, but it's not the nicest thing to work with. But it has been a pretty solid power supply for the 8 or so years that I've been using it. And finally, the motherboard. Now this is an OEM Gateway 2000 board. Now I think this was possibly out of a G5 200 machine originally. but I just got it as a loose board with the CPU and RAM way back in 2017. Now this has a 200MHz Pentium 1 CPU, no MMX here, and it has 64MB of RAM. And wow, I'd forgotten that the battery holder arrived broken and I needed to use blue tack to hold the battery in. Before I can use this case, I'm going to have to do some work on the front panel connectors, as this was designed specifically for their own motherboard. Now what I'm going to do here is take the pins out and then put them into some standard 2 and 3 pin connectors that should then fit into the motherboard quite nicely. And also, while I had this motherboard out, I figured it would be a good time to do a cheeky upgrade, as I have this 233MHz MMX CPU. Now on pure megahertz, it's only a 17% improvement, but the extra cache and the other improvements that they made should make it much faster. And for the games that use MMX, it should be even better. And once it's all put back together, we'll have to run some benchmarks to see how it goes. This heatsink and fan is complete overkill for this CPU, but I would rather it be cool than even the possibility of running hot, as I want this to last as long as possible. To enable the correct speed, we're going to have to change one of the jumpers. But it's not the correct setting, as this Mobo doesn't actually have the right multiplier. But instead selecting the 1.5, the CPU will translate that into the correct one, which took a little bit of research to find out. After getting that PSU out, I realised, yeah, it's a bit crap. It required way too many splitters and converters to be useful. And after looking through my spares, I picked out this other modern supply. It provides far more power on the 5V rails than the previous one, and it's also modular, and I have all the right cables that should make this much nicer to use. But first things first, let's fit the backplate, as if I don't do it now, I will honestly forget it until it's way too late, and it should just fit in like a glove? And with that finally in place, it's time to put in the PSU. And then it's onto the motherboard. Now even though these are both OEM parts from completely different companies, it turns out they did the right thing and followed the ATX spec, so the motherboard lines up perfectly with the case. Don't you just love it when a standard is used? Now you might be thinking, why bother with a P1 when I've already got a 486 and a Pentium computer? And the answer is simple. For some reason, that P3 machine crashes every time it tries to play a DOS VGA game. I've never fully worked out why, but everything I've attempted hasn't worked. So this P1 is great for those later DOS games. I also wanted a Win95 machine, as I have some games and hardware that work better with that OS. Plus, it's also a very good excuse to use that OS that I had in my teen years, as well as use my old Voodoo 1 card. Not just because it is a nice card, but there are a few games that will only work on the original Voodoo, and that also run under DOS. Now it's time to try out those new front panel connectors that we fitted earlier. And who knows if I get the LEDs the right way round first time. But when it comes to the PC speaker, things are a little bit trickier, as neither this or the previous tower had a cone speaker. There's just this little piezoelectric buzzer built into the motherboard, and because there's nowhere to really fit a cone speaker to this case, I decided to make use of the PC speaker header on the sound card. Now this sounds a hell of a lot better than the buzzer, but it's still not perfect. but it does make it much easier to record game footage with the PC speaker playing. And with everything in place and a keyboard connected, let's boot. And the power LED turns on. It's detected the CPU at the right speed. And there's even a drive activity light. It's a little odd that they're both the same colour and at that this yellowy orange, but I am very happy that it all seems to work. And first things first, we gotta get onto the benchmarking. And for that I ran a number of DOS and Windows tests. For DOS, I had to go with the Phil's benchmark suite, and I just picked a couple of games, Doom and Quake. For Doom, we got 70 frames per second for the 200MHz CPU versus 76 on the MMX. It's only an 8% improvement, but I think at this rate it's more limited by the graphics card than the CPU. So what about Quake? Well, it actually had very similar results, at just an 8% improvement. So we ended up with 12 frames per second versus 13. Now this is running at 640 by 480, so it is a relatively high resolution for Quake. But I was expecting a little bit more here. So maybe it's also being held back a little bit by the graphics card, rather than the CPU. So let's check out a few more CPU intensive games. And under Windows, I decided to run Quake 2, but in software mode. And after running Demo 1, we get a score of 14 FPS versus 19, which is a lovely 30% uplift. Now that is what I was hoping for. Next we have to run Unreal, but it's also running with the 3DFX card. As I wanted to see if this game was CPU or graphics card bound. Plus I still enjoy watching the fly around that castle, and the end result of this one was 12 FPS versus 15, so a 25% improvement. So it does show that this game was still being bound by the CPU, even with the 3DFX card. And this is some lovely results. And also by law, if you're talking about the Pentium 1 MMX, you have to feature Pod. And for this I'm running Pod Gold, but in direct 3D mode, as there's no actual benchmarking mode in the game, and Fraps won't work under Glide. And as it's not a complete like-for-like example, as I'm just driving around, I will just show them side by side. And as we can see, the MMX mode is giving it a good 5 to 10 frames per second frame rate boost on average. So this is definitely punching well above its 33 extra megahertz, and it has made for a very nice upgrade for this machine. I'm not finished yet, as this is a well-used install of Windows. There's software that I installed for videos way back in 2019 on it still. So due to that, and having the wrong drivers for the sound card installed, I want to start fresh. And the initial step has to be to take a backup of the SD card using HDD raw copy. This does mean that no matter what happens, I can easily return to a known state if anything goes wrong. And the plan is to take another image once everything is installed and set up. So it will be easier in future to just reset this whole machine back and remove all the clutter. I'm installing this as I normally do, by copying the Win9X CD to the second partition or drive, and then using that rather than the CD directly, as I find it tends to install a bit faster, and then afterwards I have all the files needed to hand when I then go and install the other drivers. And after a short while we have a fresh new desktop. So next up had to be the drivers, even if the defaults all seem to be working fine. But I want that extra software that came with the sound card. And this time it all works, and it even shows the 2MB of RAM for the sound banks. And we can play some of the classic Windows MIDI files with that fancy new MIDI player that Creative provided. After getting the Voodoo 1 card installed with 3dfx's reference drivers, I had to play a bit more of Pod, but this time with both MMX and Glide, and it runs like a dream. And with that, I could class this machine as done, and I could end the video right now. But there is a few more things that I want to do. And the first is to install this Multimedia access panel, as the idea of being able to access the game port from the front of the computer really appeals to me, as it would make it so much easier to use all the random controllers that I've been messing around with recently. The package consists of the front panel itself, with this very long cable with a chunky connector at the end of it, a back panel that you'll have to connect yourself, and then a breakout cable that will connect to all the various devices. And to fit this, you have to take off the whole of the front panel, as that will give me access to the bays, and I can remove the blanking panel. Now after screwing on the rails, it will then just slot into place, with that cable snaking its way through the machine out to the back, which is then just screwed into place, and then we can attach the ports that are required, which in this instance is the game port and the headphone jack, which is now free to use as I cleaned up and reflowed the line out jack, and it seems to be working great now. And it's now ready to use. And while it doesn't look amazing, it does fit in with the aesthetics of the machine, even if its colour is a little bit off. And the last step of this project has to be putting on some case stickers. Now I bought a range of them so I would have something to pick from. Now I was really hoping to be able to take the 3dfx sticker that I had on the previous case and put it on this one, but it doesn't really fit. And I didn't want to get rid of it, so it ended up on my wall of stickers, as this was actually one of the earliest donations to the channel, so I just had to keep it. So this is what I've gone for. The Pentium MMX and the Win95 ones feel just right for this type of machine. And in the place of that domed Voodoo sticker, I have this silver styled one as well, which matches up with the other two. And I think this all looks quite nice together. And with that, this machine is complete. Okay, yeah, there are a few bits that could be done, like the RAM on the sound card, and possibly the LEDs on the front panel. I think it would be better if there were two different colours, like maybe green for power and then keep the orange for the drive usage. And after installing Lotus Smart Suite, I have to say this feels so much more like home. But this definitely won't be the last time you'll see this machine, as it gets used for all sorts of videos. And I do have a few planned that this combo of hardware and software will be ideal for. So while I continue to play a few of my favourite Win95 games, I will see you later. And until next time, I was the Goldfish, that was me rocking it 90s style, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for sticking with me as I rehomed one of my more used PCs. And if you enjoyed this slice of nostalgia, then you might consider liking and subscribing. But if you'd like to watch more content, then I've made a few similar videos on my other machines, as well as covered a number of Windows 9X games. So you could check those out instead.